I'm not super happy if I have a static portfolio right now because I
No.
think there's going to be higher attrition on them if you're not putting technology in it.
Right.
Technology is just it's
Hmm.
becoming more and more, part of our business
Yeah.
every day.
Hey everybody, James Shepard here with another edition of the Merchant Sales Podcast. Today we're talking about this idea of is payments eating software. So we talk a lot about software eating payments, but today we have a really different approach to this, and we're talking about just how the payments companies and ISOs are really positioned to make incredible partnerships with software companies. And so I've got my good friend Dustin Magaziner from PayBright talking about a recent strategic deal that he did with a point of sale company, and then just kind of talking about how both of us see the future of the industry playing out. And it's really a very, very interesting interview. Then we go into our sales tips from Rich Norton, which is always a really exciting, positive part of the podcast. And then I'm especially excited about this new segment called Today in Payments. We did one last week. I just am finding so much value in this. And so what basically happens is throughout the week, Patti Murphy and I just kind of email back and forth with each other about news stories and developments. We look at a variety of resources to say, what are the most important kind of 3 to 5 news stories or current events that are impacting the payments industry? And we just kind of go through and rapid fire educate you on what's happening and then give you our thoughts on how this might impact the payments industry. Today we have four, news stories, little nuggets that I really think will get you thinking more strategically. Listening to this every week, I think is going to really add a significant amount of strategy to your context as you're looking at your business. Don't forget, you can always go to todayinpayments.com. It's a new resource that I put together with Patti Murphy that you can go to. We started out doing like a daily one, and now we're going to do this once a week version where we kind of have everything from the week so that you can go there and listen just to that. There's also a separate podcast version if all you want to do is get that Today in Payments. We have that there as well, or if you want to share it or something like that. So, with that being said, I guess I should mention here Dustin Magaziner. Actually, they PayBright is a paid advertiser, not of this podcast, but CC Sales Pro. So they're on our on our page of sponsors that we have. That really doesn't have any impact on this particular podcast interview, but I do want to mention that I always try to be transparent about that on the podcast. So with that being said, let's dive into this interview with Dustin Magaziner talking about payments eating software. Hey everybody, I'm here today with my good friend Dustin Magaziner. How you doing today, Dustin?
I am great. I am happy to be here on the eve of ETA.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, very excited about that. Yeah, I guess we're recording this like 2 days before ETA starts, so we're coming up here pretty quick. Hey, so of course, for those of you who don't know, Dustin is the CEO of a company called PayBright, which is a fantastic company, really big focus on agents. And recently, kind of came out that Dustin, you had done a strategic partnership, and even on the cap table of a point of sale company, which is pretty awesome. And so we're going to talk a little bit about today of just how do payments companies partner with software companies. We see a lot of the other direction. Hey, software is monetizing payments. How do payments companies partner with technology companies? But by way of kind of introduction, Dustin, maybe you could just introduce yourself to the audience for those who maybe don't know you and talk a little bit about what's happening at PayBright these days.
Absolutely. So I started PayBright, 12, 13 years ago now, which is crazy. When I was 19, a full-time college student, and like probably most listeners, I was out on the streets, knocking on doors, selling terminals, really. We've grown a lot since then. We've built out our entire business model on Agent ISO, but really a big focus for us over the last 2 years or so is the shift towards technology. I think there's this change happening. I remember when I got into this business, we were hearing about the change that would happen, and
Right.
I actually believe it happened slower than experts predicted. But
Yes.
I do think it is happening now. I think that change is here. We are in the midst of it, and PayBright is really taking a front seat approach to this change. We don't want to get left behind, and I think there are things we're doing to accomplish that. So really, right now, PayBright is a home for agent and ISOs. It's all we do. We have no in-house sales, but with probably more of a focus on technology integrations, POS. All of the software businesses need to run and putting those products in the hands of agents and ISOs out on the streets.
Sure. So let's start by zooming out a little bit before we dive into this new kind of exclusive partnership that you have. Let's talk about POS Desk in general. Obviously, you were seeing this change coming. We've had lots of conversations about this, and you were trying to position the company for that. So talk about POS Desk. How long ago did that start, and kind of how big of a piece is that into your strategic vision for the future of PayBright and integrated technology?
Yeah. So our POS desk is a team here at PayBright that is built to help agents and ISOs sell and support POS for local merchants. So this was born from the idea, almost the inverse of what a lot of our competitors were doing. A lot of our competitors were either A, that maybe they had one or two products that they sold, and if you were an agent and you wanted that product, you went there, and if they didn't have what you needed, you had to go find it yourself or basically walk away from deals. Or two, some of our competitors were going and acquiring technology just to acquire the merchants, right? They would force them to switch to another product or shut down the technology. But our view was that there's these agents out there. They come across all of these businesses on Main Street, USA. From one day it might be a hair salon, the next day it might be a pharmacy, the next day it might be an auto shop, and the next day something completely different. And these merchants wanted to work with them, but they didn't have the solutions anymore. It wasn't just a terminal to really win that deal. And it was getting really difficult for a lot of these agents to not, walk away from them because it was so complicated. So our POS desk brings the solutions. They're the experts in these technologies. They are a sales team at the end of the day. They help our agents and our ISOs close these deals. So we built this out a little over 2 years ago. And for me, I really believe this is the future of the business. So every, week, every month, every year, they're continuing to expand those relationships and expand those partnerships. There's certain verticals today that we don't have as many or as good, or in some cases, any solutions that we're, excited about. So they're actively looking for new ones. And then, of course, actively working with our agents to bring these products to their merchants.
Awesome. So let's take a pause here and maybe you could just kind of introduce for us this new relationship. I know you've made an investment in the company, you have an exclusive relationship. So what's the name of the company? What do they do? Give us a little bit of a highlight of what this is.
Absolutely. So this was a deal that took almost a year of my time. Very excited, but we invested strategically in a restaurant, well, really a point of sale solution. I think some of the folks over there prefer not to be called a restaurant solution, so apologies there. But a system called Figure POS. We are very excited by this. We've been working with them for the better part now of probably 2+ years. And the reason we were so interested is the agent and merchant experience. I personally, PayBright, we are obsessed with what we call the agent experience. I think it's something that lacks in our industry.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, so many of our competitors see agents and ISOs as kind of a way to just acquire their own customers as opposed to the agent as their customer, right?
Mhm.
We see our agents and our ISOs as our actual customers. So we are very focused on our agent ISO experience. And Figure also was very focused on that experience. We have not worked with any system firsthand that had an easier onboarding experience, easier implementation experience from menus to install. And that to us was gold.
Yeah.
So, of course, technology matters. The product is fantastic, but it was really the ease of sales and the ease of implementation that made us really interested. So we did take a strategic, position. It made us the exclusive processor of the future for them, and really gave PayBright agents and ISOs that advantage, right? That competitive advantage out in the field. And we're really excited with where we're at and where we're going.
So a little bit of a different question here, but we were talking about this before we started recording. And I was just curious to have you share with the audience. Like, obviously there's several options here, right? There's the option of becoming the largest controlling shareholder. There's the option of just buying the business outright. There's also the option of not buying any equity and just trying to form that kind of processor agnostic partnership. You kind of took this middle path where it sounds like you took a strategic position here, but you are on the cap table of the company. Talk about like this balancing act and like why you ended up where you did in these kind of, there's the kind of, we see a lot more of the big extremes. We see a lot more of the processor agnostic, partnerships, which a lot of times result in some problems. And then we see the full acquisition, which could also result in problems. Talk about this middle road that you chose.
I think the middle road that we're in was perfect for us and perfect for them, and all interests aligned. If let's just pretend we were to have acquired a point of sale solution or a technology, the reality is PayBright today is not really a tech company, and most payments companies are not. We are sales and service, and we're really good at what we do. We're good at helping our agents sell and servicing our agents and our merchants. I would say we're the best at that. But what we don't do is we don't build out point of sale solutions, and taking that in-house would have resulted in probably years of stepping backwards and having to learn the technology and so on. So we really wanted the technology to keep evolving, right? I mean, that's the goal. We want to be at the forefront of technology, and I really believe that if this became completely in-house at PayBright, that probably wouldn't have happened. And there's a lot of examples of that happening elsewhere. Most of the time, from what I see, when a payments company acquires a technology platform, it's usually just to acquire those customers, and that technology typically ends up dying over the next couple of years. It's kind of just dying on the vine.
Right.
So that wasn't really what we wanted to do. Of course, we could have just continued to operate the way we were, right? And have been, the largest sales channel and distribution. Of course, that has a lot of advantages and perks. But the trade-off is we don't have as much upside when we build the sales of the product, right? We are going
Right.
to take this product to kind of the next level in terms of sales and distribution. I expect to have a 400 to 500% growth rate in the next, 12 to 15 months with the product, just through PayBright alone. And that's through no additional sales partners, just who we have today. And I'm sure we
Right.
will acquire new sales partners as a result of this product.
Right.
And of course, we want to have upside on that as well. So
Yeah.
there's this win-win, um, from the way this deal is structured.
So I think what I hear you saying is really two things you were focused on here. It sounds like, number one, the engagement of the existing team. So you want to make sure the existing founder, the team that's there now, they need to have a serious vested interest, maybe even a controlling interest in developing their product, servicing their clients post sale, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And then I think, that it sounds like that was like a really big part of it. But the other side is you're going to be not only increasing your residuals, but as a result of your distribution, you're going to be increasing the valuation of this technology company. So you want to be on the cap table so that at least you're going to get some benefit to that upside potential as well as having the strategy. Did I say that right?
Absolutely. Like if we think about Clover as an example, how much of Clover's valuation, which is massive, is the byproduct of all of the agents and ISOs
Right.
over the last 10 years?
Right.
A
Massive.
huge chunk of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
None of us are benefiting from that unless you bought Fiserv stock or First Data stock years ago and benefited as a shareholder. But none of us are really benefiting from the fruits of our labor in the grand scheme of things. I didn't want
Right.
to go through that scenario again.
Yeah.
Um, and Clover corners the market in that world. There's nothing we can do about it. They have their product. We all need it for certain things. But we can avoid that this time in that we're
Yeah.
gonna, grow this
Mhm.
technology, this platform, this
Sure.
POS, tremendously. And of course, we're gonna benefit, a little bit on both sides.
Yeah, great. All right, one last deal question, and then we'll move on to some more practical things for the agents. But any tips? So you've been doing this now for like a year, a couple of years into the relationship. Going back 2 years ago, anything you would have said to Dustin Magaziner 2 years ago about this deal that would have made it go smoother, better, anything like that?
I wish I had done the deal earlier. It would have been probably a better
Sure.
valuation in the grand scheme of things. Um, I think what I would tell myself, this was the first deal I've personally done that's exactly like this. Um, to just be patient. The deal took a while, right? Both
Yeah.
parties were looking for a very strategic relationship, and we got that. But I mean, this deal took almost a year. It was expensive to get done. I think both parties probably thought at different times the deal was going to fall through, and it didn't. It is a done deal,
Yep.
and I think everyone's really happy with where we're at. But these deals aren't as easy as I think people think. You hear people say all the time, "Oh, why don't you just buy this or buy that?" And they don't realize the work that sometimes goes in behind the scenes to get it done.
Yeah.
Some of the points that may be really important to the other side. And that's not to say the other side's unreasonable. Just we're not always looking from their lens. So,
Right. Right.
it was really, I think, if any advice would have been going with an open mind, because I will tell you where the deal started is certainly not where the deal ended.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
those were completely different
Yeah.
deals.
Well,
So
and that's the thing too, Dustin. I think people don't appreciate the complexity of, you have this blank canvas. It's like, okay, it's like I want to work with this company, and it's like, well, okay, well, I want to buy them. Well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean with a convertible note? Do you mean with a safe? Do you mean all cash? Do you mean stock? Do you mean like, and it's usually a combination of things, right? Or it's like, no, I want to do we're going to just do a strategic partnership. What does that mean? What is the founder? What do they want? What do you want? What percentage do you want? What's the valuation? What's the valuation based on? What's the valuation going to be in 12 months? What's the valuation going to be by the time you're done with the deal? Like there's so many variants. And the problem is as you progress in the deal, all those variables tend to surface. If you're going to do a good deal, you want all the variables to surface before it's closed. And every time a new one surfaces, it's like, well, another round of talks because we didn't think about that. And so yeah, it takes a while to get a good deal,
exactly.
especially when you have a deal where neither party needs the other one. Like it's like it obviously there's a synergy and there's an opportunity, but it's like PayBright doesn't like have to have this company. And they don't have to have you. It's like then it becomes hard because then it's like, all right, well, we want to do the best deal possible, and it changes things a little bit. All right.
And a lot of the oh, I
Good.
was just gonna say, a lot of the time when a tech company is raising cash, they're sometimes a lot of the time doing it out of desperation, right? That runway is
Yes.
coming up. In this case, it wasn't that type of deal.
Right.
They didn't need our money,
Yeah, they have a big
right?
company, they have a successful company, and yeah.
The win-win was the strategy, right? It
Right.
truly was the definition of a strategic deal. All parties win, which honestly makes it more exciting for me because not to say that giving money to a company that absolutely needs the cash is a bad thing. It happens all the time, but I think there is some benefit to a company being in a
Oh yeah.
good footing.
Absolutely. Um, let's talk about hospitality. So, obviously, again, I know there's other verticals being served here, but hospitality being a big focus at the time, at this time for this partnership, very tough. Very competitive vertical. Installations can be tricky. Why choose hospitality? Why was that your first kind of big deal?
Almost for the exact reason you just said, because of how
Mhm.
tough it is
Yeah,
and how easy this product has been for us.
I see.
That is why we were so interested in this deal. We've sold a lot of systems in the restaurant world, and we've been punched in the face more times than I can count. Installs that go poorly, support that's not there, hardware dead on arrival, hardware never shipped or delivered on time, pricing that's inconsistent, just everything you could experience. And
Yep.
every agent or ISO I think listening has probably experienced a lot of the same things. Then there's product gaps. This was really the first solution we've come across and worked with where it really checked off a lot of our boxes. The technology was there. That's obviously important. The technology works. Pricing is not ridiculous, and I don't buy on price. So that was not a deciding factor in
Mhm.
terms of how much do merchants pay, right? Pricing is great, but that was not the big
Right.
factor. The big factor was what I call the ag factor. Was there a lot of aggravation for an agent
Mhm.
to sell this for a merchant to get up and running? And that was a hard no. It was just so simple on all of the merchants we did. It's like, how do we do more of this? I don't want to
Yeah.
sell anything else because we're having nothing but
Right.
support challenges and issues of some kind. Even Clover, right? Clover's easy
Oh
out of the
yeah.
box. But if you have a real issue with Clover, like
Oh yeah.
kind of
Good
hard to
luck.
get support. It is
Yeah.
good that it's pretty solid out of the box.
Right.
But what if, and you have
Yeah.
a liability there? So that is what made us so interested in this vertical was I think there's this huge gap of ease and this solved for that. So I wasn't even looking at it from a price perspective or any of that. Our whole point of our POS desk is Mr. Agent, Mr. ISO, you focus on what you're best at, selling to local businesses, and we will take it from there. We will handle the demos, we'll handle the pricing, we'll handle the financing if they need financing, we'll handle the sale of the technology and the implementation and the menu and the install. And we struggled with this with some other systems because the amount of labor it was taking was extensive because the product had problems. We
Yeah.
don't have that problem here.
Yeah. Dustin, one of the things that I think about so much these days is that, we keep hearing, and I've been a big proponent of saying this over the last 5 years that, software is eating payments, right? And it's this, I've said it many, many times, kind of a mantra. And, as I've gotten closer to software companies, I've started to go, I don't know, I think maybe payments could eat software. And what I mean by that is we have these two, incredible advantages or levers that we can pull, and that is distribution, which is by far the biggest limiting factor for these software companies, whether it's POS, whether it's vertical specific, card not present, it doesn't matter. Like you're going after a niche. It's hard to reach the people in that niche. I mean, that's just the way it goes. So distribution. But the other one is this cash flow implication of like, we have this liquid value of residuals that the software companies don't seem to understand how to leverage. So talk about that a little bit. How do you see this playing out in terms of just the direction of the market over the next 5 years? Do you see a lot of ISOs and processing companies kind of starting to figure out how to structure these partnerships? Or is it, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think they should. I
Yeah, whether
don't
they
really
will.
think I don't really think we will. I think that the big guys, right, the big ISOs, what some refer to as these super ISOs, they don't know how to understand technology. I mean, there are companies that are billion-dollar companies. I won't name them, but they haven't invested in any technology, even their own platforms, in a
Yeah, I know,
decade.
right? Yeah.
And they're wondering why companies like Square are crushing them. It's not just their sales, it's the sales and distribution approach, the marketing. It's also because their technology is just better than what they're offering. So all of the agents and ISOs have started going out trying to find technology for a reason. I've heard some big companies, super ISO so to speak, say that they are BYOD, bring your own device. I'm like, that is the worst answer you could have. So I don't really believe we will see a lot of the big guys do it. I think there's a more realistic possibility of some of the mid-sized companies, sort of like PayBright, getting into that space and maybe accelerating growth, for the
Right.
mid-size. But I do think it's a smart move. I think that we need to be investing more in technologies for our agents and ISOs. And whether that means we own it, we're on the cap table, we have, just a good relationship and strategic partnership, whatever it is, this is going to be a huge part of the future. Of
Yep.
course, if you're in a position to find a technology that's looking to either have an investment or be acquired and it's going to make sense, it's a win-win. But I've also seen investments go south, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
a point of sale company that several good sized processors invested in. I don't know that they knew that the POS company was taking investment from multiple processors, and the technology didn't really work, and it kind of failed. And I think all of them kind of
Yeah.
lost their money on this deal. So, not every deal, not every investment is
Right.
going to make money, right? But I do think payments companies need to be investing more in technology, whether it's in their own platforms or technology for merchants, right? Like integrated software. I do believe that's really important over the next couple of years.
Yeah. I actually spent the weekend, I spent a bunch of time looking at this particular deal. I'm looking to acquire this company. It's kind of adjacent to CC Storage, and I can't disclose all the details here because I'm in the middle of the negotiation. But it just so when you actually dive into the numbers, and you're like, oh, like you mentioned, it's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna 5x, 10x this company's growth trajectory instantly, nearly. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that's worth a lot. That's a huge lever to pull. And then when you also go, okay, and as I'm doing that, I'm building this liquid asset in margin that I know that I have the connections to be able to just leverage that in any way I want. It's an insane kind of, duo there when you're doing deal structure. And I think payments companies just haven't quite, like ISOs especially, they haven't quite figured this out yet. They don't realize what they're sitting on.
So, what's amazing is I think a lot of our competitors are so focused on how to monetize their existing merchant book through things that I don't even believe in, like
Right.
increasing rates. Like people that know me know I fundamentally do not believe in increasing merchant rates. I think it creates artificial attrition on the back end that's just not worth it.
Right.
Not to mention it pisses off your sales channel. But they're so focused on how do we make an extra dollar on our existing merchant as opposed to how do we go and acquire two more high profile or high valued merchants, and maybe we need to invest in technology to do it.
Right.
They're just so focused on these terminals, right? And that's not, again,
Yeah.
plenty of merchants getting terminals. We ship a lot of terminals every day, but it's not going to be the business in 10 years. And I don't mean to scare people listening. I mean, if you are an agent who has a portfolio and you're semi-retired sitting on the beach and you're not actively converting them to point of sale or adding new customers to the mix, I think you have a liability right now.
Yeah.
That scares people when I say that. If you are new to the business and you're
Mhm.
actively growing your portfolio through technology, I think you are in such an amazing position. I
Right.
want to be that agent.
Right.
But I'm not super happy if I have a static portfolio right now because I
No.
think there's going to be higher attrition on them if you're not putting technology in. So it's a whole
Absolutely.
different angle, but
Right.
technology is just it's
Mm.
becoming more and more, part of our business
Yeah.
every day.
Well, so let's talk about that agent a little bit. So the agent, right? They're again, a lot of them still are primarily selling terminal. A lot of them are selling Clover, right? Other generalized solutions like that. And so that agent, how should they be thinking about this? As they're looking for those partnerships, like, okay, do I go PayBright? Do I go this company? Do I get, what should they be thinking about it? How should they be looking at this?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of shameless plug here. When it comes to that, I don't think there really is a competitor for PayBright on the market today with what we do on our POS desk. And that doesn't mean that if an agent is selling 5 deals a month and four of them are on terminals and one of them is POS, that those four they might not see a competitor for. But when it comes to truly having support for POS integration, and everything, I don't think there's a true competitor in the market today. We'll see where we're at in a year or two, but right now we don't see anyone doing what we're doing. Um, I think we were just a little ahead of the game, and we'll see
Well, and
if
again,
that
I think
changes.
to clarify, like it's hard. So, again, the card not present world, right? Very different there because it's like, oh yeah, you bring on a software company, they're fantastic, you roll it out, everybody cheers. when it's like, okay, we have to go install this point of sale system. It has to go well. There's hardware involved. There's network, it, yeah, it's difficult. It's very difficult.
It is. And every system, what that looks like is different, right?
Mhm.
How big is the merchant? I mean, these factors come in. I mean, an install for a restaurant with 20 stations does not look the same as a small little coffee shop that's getting one station. I don't care what the system is, it doesn't
Right.
look the same.
Right.
The amount of time it takes isn't the same. The amount of questions, the training, the amount of days, it's completely different. And that's, of course, just using a restaurant versus a coffee shop,
Right.
but it, completely agree. So, I don't really think there is a true competitor to what we're doing today, other than the agents and ISOs who have taken it on themselves and struggle with it and don't realize the amount of bandwidth it's taking from their sales, right? And so our whole thing is like, we're going to give all this back to you. Not to
Mhm.
mention, many of you have just given up on this and said we're not going to do it. So, for me, I think if you're an agent today and not in half of your sales every month don't have an integrated solution as part of it, you need to be challenging yourself as to why.
Yeah.
If the answer is because all my merchants don't want technology, I promise you that's not true. They're
Right.
using technology, right? They're just not using the technology with you. And that doesn't mean that you're not able to get around it with a side terminal or something. But if you're not doing integrated payments in a good percentage of your merchants, you're falling behind the rest of the industry. I have enough agents to tell you that you are falling behind. I see the portfolios. I see the portfolios that are growing the fastest. I see the portfolios that have higher or lower attrition. I see the portfolios that have higher margins. And all of the positives are on the integrated portfolios. And that doesn't mean restaurants for all of them. It could be medical, it could be hospitality, it could be hotels, it could be card not present, it could be that you just want to focus on QuickBooks integrations. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
understand that your higher margins, lower attrition, et cetera, easier future referrals even are all when you get integrated.
Yeah.
So, I have some agents that have legacy portfolios with us. They've had these portfolios for 5, 10 plus years. I encourage them, go to these merchants, start talking about integrations.
Mm.
One of my favorite stories, actually, I have an agent at the beach here in the Carolinas, and he had a large merchant with, in his portfolio with us, cash discount merchant using terminals. This account probably represented about 15,000 a month in residuals for him every month, a big chunk of his book. Only 5 accounts, but same owner. I said, hey, like, you should probably talk to them about a POS. No, they're on terminals. They're happy. Told him again. So he finally calls them just to kind of, hey, if you're ever interested, let me know. We do POS as well. Merchant says, wait, really? I actually just scheduled a demo with Toast. That agent, of course, was like, whoa, let's talk. We got them on a point of sale with PayBright. And he probably kept that account, I don't know, he's going to have them another 5 to 6 plus years, maybe longer, but would have lost them had he not made this call, almost certainly.
Yeah.
That's 15,000 a month that
Yep.
he's now going to have for another 5 years. Do the math.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
That was a
hundreds of
very, very
thousands of dollars.
profitable phone call.
Yes. But he
Yeah.
was afraid to talk about technology.
Right.
He was afraid of it. So he got to have our POS desk on the call. They got to talk to the merchant about what features and talk the language of restaurants, in this case, bars. And it was a win win. And it was an expensive deal. PayBright financed the whole thing. So the merchant had no money out of pocket, but he would have lost that deal. Toast
Yeah.
would have been in there by today had he not
Right.
made that
Oh
proactive
yeah.
call. So to
Yeah.
me, if you have a portfolio like that, you need to start making these calls, especially on your high margin deals.
Hmm. So, Dustin, my last question for you it's actually a tough one to ask because it's kind of a complicated question. So I'll see if I can break it down. So this question is about two things really, I guess. It's one is kind of verticalization, and the other one is kind of just the future deal structures that you see. So my question is, this deal that you just did, do you see yourself doing a bunch more deals like that? Meaning, is it like, okay, I need to go after each vertical, which again, I know is kind of more my thing. That's more my focus is like every single vertical I want to solve for that. But there's a lot of downside with that too, because a lot of additional complexity. Or is it like, okay, I want a couple of strategic partners and I want to help those companies develop the feature set to service more, to standardize? How do you think about this in terms of how do you see the future playing out as you want to have more and more solutions for like market coverage?
So right now, PayBright feels pretty good about our market coverage in terms of just software solutions that we have. Admittedly, there's only one vertical that we are truly struggling in. We just have not been able to find a good, reliable solution. So if any of your listeners are in this space and want to reach out to me, we're all ears. And it's really mechanic shops, right? You're
Mhm.
kind of local mechanic shop. I know we're not the only company that's really struggled to find a good solution. There's three or
Yeah.
four technologies or softwares in that space that just dominate the space.
Right.
And it's a vertical that tends to be a little bit more okay with side terminals compared to others, just with the way they run their
Right.
businesses.
Hasn't been as much pressure to switch them to integrated. Yeah.
Correct. There's not as much upside, right? They don't do a lot in the way of recurring payments and so on. They don't run a high number of transactions per day 'cause it's relatively high ticket, but would still love to find a solution. We have not been able to find one. It is a
Yeah.
high
Yeah.
level item on our list. But aside from that, we're not necessarily out. We are buyers or investors, but there are a few technologies that we work with today that if they opened it up for us to invest, we absolutely would. And they
Right.
are in different verticals or in different,
Sure.
lines of software than Figure that we just, obviously invested in.
Yeah.
So we absolutely would, and would love to continue to do it because I know there are some verticals we could help, or not verticals, softwares we could help, expand further and build their
Right.
business. But some of them aren't looking for investment.
Right.
I actually shot an email to a software that we work with very closely and said, "Hey, are you interested?" Nope, they weren't interested at all. Didn't want my money.
Right.
So, I can't force it.
Right.
Um, so strategically, yes. Just to do it, no.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, Dustin, always a fascinating conversation. I always enjoy talking with you. It's interesting. I think there's kind of there's a core group of payments experts and things right now in the industry that all of us kind of have these similar assumptions, So it's like, all right, like, integrated payments, that's going to happen. Agents need to adjust, that's going to happen. And then there's all of these interesting like ways to do it, and different ways to attack it. What's the role of the software company? What's the role of the agent? What's the role of the ISO? So I think it's going to be so interesting the next kind of 36 months as all of us grapple with these changes and try to figure out what to do next. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys do. Love what you have at PayBright. For those agents who just want to learn more, maybe they heard this and they're like, hey, I have a merchant that'd probably be perfect. Where would you send them to reach out and learn more?
You can email us. It's relationships@gopaybright.com. So it's relationships with an S at gopaybright.com. You can also call in our phone line has an option for new prospective partners. That number is 984-272-2568. Just go to the prospective partners option. Our team is more than happy to chat with you about ways we can help or products that we offer for, a specific merchant. Um, but contrary to again our competitors, we don't just want to say here's the solution. We want to get on the call with you and your merchant, right?
Mm.
Our sales team will literally get on with you and your merchant, and they're at PayBright, right? It's not at the software provider who only cares about if they close that technology, which isn't always the right fit. We want the right solution, so we all keep that customer long term. So give us a call, email us. We'd be happy to talk.
Love it. Dustin, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it as always.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey everybody, back here again with my good friend Rich Norton. How you doing today, Rich?
I'm doing excellent. Always great to talk with you. This is a true joy for me. It really is. It's fun.
It is fun. I always enjoy it as well. And
Yes.
it's I was just thinking before this that it's really cool that you're doing this, Rich. I mean, I think everybody at this point understands you could be, on a desert island somewhere with your family and just taking some time off. But instead, you're out in the field today. I think you said you closed a couple of merchant accounts today, right?
Yes, definitely.
So I got a
That's the
couple of
best
merchant
part of
accounts
what
done. And
Yeah, best part about what we do, I supervise a couple hundred representatives around the country, and people say, "Why do you still go out and sell?" Well, number one, I love it, and I just love helping people, and I love leading by example. I'm very competitive, and even to this day, as you know, I still write about 300 merchants in a year, and it's the best part. I love getting up in the morning. I don't need to, but I love getting up in the morning, getting dressed, getting out in the field. It's a new day. It's an exciting day. Let's go out and help somebody today.
I love it. I love it. I always think back to I was at a retriever way back in the retriever days. I was at a retriever summit, and I think you told me that your slogan of having fun and making money. If you're having fun, you're making money. If you're making money, you're having fun, and those things tend to go together, right?
Exactly right. It's so true because representatives say, "Man, I'm in a slump right now," and I'll go right back to that. I'll say, "Look, you're not having any fun, are you?" Go, "No, this kind of sucks right now." It's a lot harder to write one or zero in a week
Right.
That's a hard week. But when you go out, think about the weeks that we go out and write 10 or 12 in a week, man, it's like, that was easy. That was great. Yeah, I mean, you just
Right.
walk in and you got that mojo, you got the momentum going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I always ask them, when you have those great weeks, tell me about it. And they
Right.
always start out by saying, it was fun, man. I'm just having so much fun.
Yeah.
I said, keep that. That's what you got to
Right.
keep doing,
Right.
because when you're having fun, you're going to make a lot of money.
I love it. Well, that's a perfect
Yes.
tie into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the psychology of selling, and specifically this idea of when you go out in the field, you're not really selling payment processing per se. First you have to sell yourself. And so talk a little bit about that, Rich. I think there's really a science behind, meeting someone for the first time, being able to make a good impression and build trust. What are some tips that you have for us on how to do that better?
Yeah, the best way I can explain that is, okay, you have this great opportunity. You're in merchant services right now, and you're about to meet your best friend, and you're going to tell them all about what you're doing right now. Well, you're not going to say, hi, James, good to see you. I work for payment processing. I want to see your statement. I help people save money. You're going to be excited about what you're doing. And it's the same thing as you're going out in the field. The impression that you want to leave with every merchant that you encounter is that the person that came by my business loves what they're doing.
Mhm.
That goes back to the having fun and making money.
Yep.
They really enjoy helping people. They were nice. They weren't a doormat. Sometimes we go in and the first thing people will say is, "Hey, I know you're busy and sorry to bother you." Get rid of all that. If you're doing that, do not be a doormat. Your time is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the merchants. You must walk into a business as the most confident person, and your philosophy is that everybody loves you and everybody wants to talk to you. You're the most exciting person in the area. You're the busiest person in the area. You're helping people out, and you're just like just a fun-loving guy or woman, whatever, whoever you're out in the field, and you're having a blast when you're out there. And that's where all that comes with good eye contact. As I always tell everybody, you
Mhm.
got to get people to like you. This goes back, and you and I have talked about this a lot. You're selling yourself. How do you get people to like you? You have to have good eye contact. I worked with a representative the other day, and he was hats off to him, working really hard. He goes, man, I'm out there, I'm pounding 30 doors a day. I'm writing 3 or 4 a month, and I'm getting so much rejection. I said, let's do a little role playing right here. Let me hear what you're saying. So he worked on his voice inflection, but one thing he didn't even notice, that his eye contact was horrible, because as he was talking, he was like looking around, hey, I'm helping people, and he's looking all over the place. And I had another guy standing next to me, one of our team leaders, and I said, what do you find that you can help him with? He goes, he needs eye contact, strong eye contact, because that builds trust. He goes, I didn't even know I was doing that.
Mhm.
So eye contact, smiling. If you see someone without a smile, give them one of yours. You're enthusiastic. You believe in what you're doing. You believe in you. Like I said, you're having fun. You're just excited about what you're doing. And the people's impression should be, that's one of the one of the greatest guys I ever met, man. I hope he comes
Yeah.
back. And that's a connection that you're making with people. I'm out in the field and I look for a nice connection, how to connect with people. You see a dog. Is that the guard dog? What kind of dog is that? You see something hanging, a big deer head. Where did you get that? A car over here. I love it when I walk into businesses and I'll see, people that are faith oriented. They got
Mhm.
a verse up there, and I'll say right off the bat, great to see a business that has faith. That's awesome. What do? They start talking about that, and you're
Right.
connecting with the people. So that all goes down to selling yourself and connecting with people.
Mm. Rich, give us just a real quick version of this, and maybe what we'll do is maybe we'll touch on this next week. But give us a real quick version of just, I think what you're talking about, a lot of it is mindset, right? Because I think a lot of times agents, they get out in the field, they kind of, they get up in the morning, they kind of rush out the door, they drop the kids off at school, they're kind of having a bad day, they don't really want to go prospecting, and then they walk into the first business and they're like, why can't I make a sale? And it's like, well, because nobody wants to talk to you. Give us
Right.
a real quick 30-second version, and then we'll do the longer version next week. But what are some tips of like, how do you get in the right mindset at the beginning of the day to have that kind of attitude?
Yeah, in fact, I'd love to do a class on that. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
It all begins in the morning. The winners rise early, as we always talk about. It's getting your body, your spirit. In order to be a top performer, you have to be in all levels at the top of your game. If you're staying out all night and you get up in the morning and you don't know where you're going that day, and you got to do this and you got to do that, it's like, oh yeah, oh by the way, I got to write some deals. Where am I going today? If you're doing that,
Not
you're
gonna
not
happen.
going to be productive at all. You got to
Yeah.
know, you got to be fired up, you got to be ready to go, you got to know exactly where you're going, and you got to have a plan. And that's what's going to spell success. That is such a great point, because I talk to some representatives, call them up in the morning, and you can tell they just got out of bed. I've been up for 3 hours already, and I'm
Right.
texting people in the morning, sending them positive notes and everything, and I'm waking them up. And you
Right.
can tell that they're not prepared. And it's like, where are you going today? Yeah, I got some follow-ups from last week. Okay, sounds great. You're going to do great today.
Well, Rich, so if for those that want to learn more, jump on next week and we're going to talk more about this morning routine. But before I let you go, Rich, how do people reach out if they want to learn more about you and your team and the coaching and
Yes,
stuff that you do?
absolutely. Yeah, as you can imagine, again, we're hundreds and hundreds of calls. We've had a bunch that have joined our team, and they're winning trips. That we've talked about the trips that we
That's
have
great.
with our team, going to Mexico and 5-star resorts, and they're having great success. So reach out to me if you feel that you're a good fit. 904-434-4635. Or you can email me at payrock, Payroc, Rich Norton at gmail.com.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
So, James, the U.S. House just approved a resolution overturning the CFPB rule that would subject big tech payment apps to the same supervisory rules as bank-owned payment apps that the agency oversees.
Oh, so a good day for Venmo, Cash App, et cetera, et cetera.
Potentially X,
X. Oh, right. Yeah, those they get into payments. Okay, so basically what you're saying is these big tech companies that have payment platforms,
right?
they just got a holiday of they're not going to be subjected to these same really stringent regulatory guidelines that like banks would be.
Well, it's more the supervisory guidelines. Okay, so there's a difference between supervisory and regulatory.
Okay.
Supervisory guidelines mean, CFPB, for example, could step in if there was, you know, uh, questionable data sharing, for example,
Okay.
or they weren't abiding by some of the regulations, like Regulation Z, truth in lending, for example.
Sure.
Regulatory means they could go in there and they could actually monitor the books.
Supervisory.
No. Regulatory means they can go in there and they can like look at the books
Okay.
and do a full regulatory examination.
And you're saying
Supervisory,
and you're saying that does still exist?
no, that was never in. That was
That
never in
was
the
never
cards.
part of it. Oh, I see. So supervisory is like the first level, and then regulatory is the second level. And you're saying they were just going to start at the first level, and now they don't even have that.
They don't even have that.
Wow, really good day for Venmo and Cash App and X and
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah.
Yeah, and
So
Google and Apple and yeah.
Apple and let's see, Apple, Google, PayPal, Square.
I wonder if there was any lobbying that went on behind the scenes
Oh,
there,
there was
Patty.
a lot of lobbying.
It's
There
like
were a couple of high tech groups that I had never heard of before,
right,
but
right.
they were lobbying really hard for it.
I bet.
And also, one of the things you have to realize is that, that was sort of like a pet project of Rohit Chopra, who was the director of
Right,
CFPB. And
right.
of course, as soon as Trump got into office, he fired Chopra. So,
Of course.
you know,
Okay.
it stands to reason that the most controversial rules were gonna get
Of course.
86'd.
Okay, that's a good start. What's our next story?
Okay, the Department of Justice has greenlight the Cap One Discover merger.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I heard about this. Tell me more about this.
Yeah. So they say, the major change of attitude, obviously, is the Biden administration, because the Biden administration was putting up roadblocks. It thought that it was going to be too big of an organization.
Well, and just to back up for 1 second to make sure our audience understands. So this is Capital One wants to buy Discover or the other way around? I can't remember.
Discover, yeah. Cap One wants to buy Discover.
Okay, all right, yeah. And so that merger was, there's always these antitrust concerns, things of that
Right.
nature. They have to make sure they're not creating a monopoly
The-
or too powerful of an organization. The government has to actually approve a merger of that size and scope. And you're saying that they have now approved that merger can go forward.
Right. The way it goes is the Department of Justice takes a look at it, makes sure there's no antitrust considerations. Then they say to the OCC and the Fed, yeah, you can approve this if you want to, or you can't approve this, depending on what they find,
And
right?
so just to clarify how big of a deal that is, I'm literally pulling out my card right now. So right now, my Capital One card is a MasterCard.
Right.
And so I think what we're saying here is that Capital One, over the next however long it's going to take to get out of these agreements, all the Capital One cards are going to become Discover cards.
It could be. They said Cap One said they're going to slowly
Yeah.
migrate. Okay.
Yeah. But
Uh,
that's to clarify, I mean, that's a gigantic shift.
Gigantic,
Like Capital One
gigantic
is one of the
shift.
largest card issuers in the country.
Yeah. Cap One has access to 305 million card holders.
Wow.
Okay, and Discover is something like 100 million.
Wow. So that's a huge. And again, so Discover has 100 million. So Capital One's going to go from 305 to 405 because none of the Discover people are Capital One people because
Right.
Capital One is all MasterCard right now. So
Right.
this is a huge. So yeah, if you're a Visa and MasterCard, you're seeing this as a pretty big threat.
Pretty big threat. According to Forbes magazine, the merger would make Cap One the nation's largest credit card issuer.
Wow. That's
And
crazy.
expectations are that Discover will retain its own brand post merger, and Cap One is going to like move some of its volume to Discover, but not all at once.
Of course. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
sure they have contractual obligations
Of
to
course, yeah, right.
MasterCard.
But I think, as you said, this deal could chip away at the dominant role of Visa and MasterCard. It could also mean that Cap One could extract better terms from Visa and MasterCard,
Right.
right? Uh, One of the things that hasn't shown up in the reporting that I think is interesting is that Discover owns Pulse, which is an EFT network.
Right.
And that raises question in my mind about debit routing,
Mm,
especially in, a post Durbin 2.0,
mm.
in the arguments over Durbin 2.0.
Right. Well, also too, isn't it like I mean, Discover has never been big on, debit cards. It's been much more Visa and
Oh yeah,
MasterCard.
they're
So
much more credit cards.
I wonder if this is also maybe a way for Capital One to get into the debit card market, maybe.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Could be
Yeah,
tough because they're going to be, it definitely would be regulated because of the size of the organization. They're
definitely.
over the 10 billion cap, so that would be interesting. But
But they
okay.
have their own, but they have their own debit network.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All
Yeah.
right. That's a big one. This is action packed today, Patty. What's our next story?
Okay, Stripe is seeking a special banking charter from Georgia.
Okay.
Okay, the payments processing company, what it would be is a charter known as a merchant acquirer limited purpose bank charter.
Okay.
So that's a mouthful, right?
Yeah.
But it would give Stripe direct access to the card networks. In other words, it would no longer need to partner with other banks to process transactions.
Right. They would be their own sponsor bank.
They would be their own sponsor bank.
Mm,
Now, news of this application comes on the heels of approval from Georgia's banking regulation for Fiserv to have a similar charter.
okay.
And the only other firm that has a similar charter is authorized by Georgia is a company called Credirax, which was acquired by Shift 4.
Okay. Sure.
So you got Shift 4, you have
Fiserv
Fiserv,
and
and you
Stripe.
have Stripe.
Hmm. It's very interesting.
That's
Well, there's just so much complexity in our industry that, that doesn't surprise me because like Stripe from the beginning has kind of been like, hey, let's fix all of these friction points in the market.
right.
And, being their own sponsor bank is kind of an obvious, next step in that evolution.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it almost kind of surprised me when I thought about it because it was like, really, they're not already their
I
own
know.
sponsor bank?
That's what I was just thinking. I'm like, is this really like their first foray into that? But apparently, and that's it. So, and I think too, it's interesting because I think early on with Stripe, they were one of the first PayFacs, and so they were able to get around banking regulations and things of that nature by being a PayFac as far as underwriting guidelines. But then
Right.
now things have evolved so much that being a PayFac, I mean, you still have a lot of those regulations from the bank, because now the bank kind of understands what you're doing.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a way for them to kind of cut that cord, but it's interesting to me too, because it could also come back to bite them in some ways. Like, they do take on a lot of high risk, a lot of garbage accounts, and
Yeah.
now being their own sponsor bank, it's one of those things where it's like, be careful what you wish for. Hopefully they'll, be able to manage that operation effectively. But now you're kind of taking all the handcuffs off, and so that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
Presumably they'll get some people in that know what they're
know
doing a
what they're
little bit
doing.
better,
Hopefully, right? Hopefully, Aquahire, they'll get some people in.
right?
Wow,
Yeah,
very, very
exactly.
interesting. Yeah. What other stories you got for us today, Patty?
Um, well, I reported not long ago. I think we actually spoke about this last week about how President Trump had signed an executive order eliminating checks from the nation's payments infrastructure,
Yes, yes.
right?
Right.
And I remember you and we talked about this. I pondered whether this would prompt corporations to follow suit.
Yeah.
Well, this week I have the answer, and it's a resounding no. The irony, though, is that check fraud is running rampant.
Really?
Yeah, according to the Association for Financial Professionals Payments Fraud and Control Survey, 75% of companies continue to use checks for at least some payments. At the same time, a just released Federal Reserve study shows that checks are the second most frequently experienced payment method to experience fraud. Only debit cards chart more fraud.
Wow.
So incidences of check fraud were up 10% last year, and money loss was up 5%. And of course, checks are more expensive to process than our electronic payments.
Right.
Think cards, right? According to the 2002 AFP Payments Cost Benchmarking Survey, the median cost of issuing a check ranged between $2 and $4. The cost of receiving checks went between $1 and $2. ACH by comparison is somewhere between 25 cents and 50 cents.
Right. Right.
So it's really interesting to me. We talk a lot about the B2B market,
Right.
or not
Right.
a lot, but we've been talking
Yeah,
more
for a
and
long
more about
time. Yeah.
I think that this is a really,
It's a huge opportunity for somebody to solve this. There's a very valuable, profitable problem for someone to solve. And
yes,
whenever you see that, and there are, to be fair, I mean, there are lots of companies right now working to solve it. I've worked with several. I've talked to quite a few. Even my friend Will Messina at GrailPay, at their ACH platform, and what
right,
they're trying to solve that problem. They're trying to be the infrastructure behind solving that problem, so
right.
that other people can build on top of it. And so yeah, there's a lot of people I think right now that are working on that. What was the one? There's a couple of really, really interesting crypto ones on the B2B side as well. I can't remember the name of the one, was something sale. But anyway, but yeah, there's a lot of really interesting tech
And
around solving
even
this.
Visa, of course,
Of course, yeah.
is working on it.
Our friend
So
Roger McNamara is over there in the B2B running
right,
that, and yeah,
exactly. So that they're working on it. If Rogers over
absolutely,
there, yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so that's those are the big highlights for today in payments.
Wow, I'm just loving this, Patty. This is action packed, and I think a lot of information for people to just kind of know what's happening. And so tune in every week as Patty gives us the most up to date information of what's been happening. We always try to record these literally the day before it goes out, so that it's really up to date. And so we'll do our best to continue bringing that information to you in a timely manner, so that you know what's happening in the payments industry. So, Patty, thank you so much for all the work you do to put this together.
Hey, thank you, James.